Welcome back to our Mussar study group. I'm Batya Gage. I'm so glad that you have joined us today as we work together on strengthening our midot, our character traits. Well, I hope that you had a really good day, our official day of, well, I guess you'd call it changing the civil calendar day. Of course, in Judaism, we had New Year's, Rosh Hashanah, a few months ago. But on the other hand, every time we turn that civil calendar to a new year, we are reminded that the civil calendar, is numbered based on the life of our Mashiach, Yeshua. So it's not entirely a bad day. Um, some people have asked me what really changed. We were really excited to say goodbye to that ugly year 2020. And some people have asked or thought or pondered what really happened at midnight on 2020 when we went to 2021. Did the pandemic go away? Did everything just get better? A lot of people might say, no, nothing really changed. But I witnessed something that did change a bit, and that was, at least for a few minutes, a few days or whatever, people had some hope that the next year, the next days would be better. So I hope that your official day of changing the civil calendar was a day that renewed and refreshed your hope that tomorrow is going to be a better day. Last week, we studied in our book, Spiritual Practices, Hakarat HaTov, gratitude, looking for the good in every situation, even the bad things that come along, because really, we learned that when something happens, we don't really know at that time, is this something good or something bad? We can't see the future. So we don't know if something good happens, is it going to turn out to be a curse in the long run? Or if something that seems bad happens, perhaps in the end it will turn out good. So gratitude is called for in every situation. Hakarat HaTov, always looking for the good. I'm not really a winter type weather person. And as soon as mid-December gets here, I am dreaming of warm weather and spring. And even today, we've got some 60-degree weather, and I'm just loving it. So for a moment, close your eyes and imagine it's spring, and you are in the most beautiful, ideal garden that you have ever seen. You can design it in your head exactly like you want to. Now, for you, is that one of these perhaps more English type gardens where the rows are precise and the hedges are trimmed to a T, and every color of flower is categorized with every other color, and it's just precise and beautiful? If that is you, if that is your picture of an ideal garden, then you're probably going to really enjoy our midot today of order. Now, or perhaps your ideal garden, like mine tends to be, is a little more chaotic. There's things that are in their right place, but they're growing more naturally, more the way they want to grow. But even in nature, even in that garden, there's still order. Plants grow, germinate, grow, bloom in order. And nature is just based on order because the Creator is a God of order. I posted a video in the Facebook group this week, and it was by Admiral McCraven giving a speech, probably a graduation speech of some kind. And he begins his speech with this: if you want to change the world, start by making your bed every day. Now, are you one that gets up every morning and makes your bed? What a great way to start your day. He says, it just starts your day off well. At least you've accomplished something right off the bat, and that's going to make you feel better and more successful as you try to accomplish other things throughout the day. But even if you had a really bad day, at least when you come home and you see that made bed, you know you at least did something right. And who doesn't love going to bed in a bed that's already made? But even better, perhaps there's even a better way to start your day with order, and that is starting your day with shakrit. In the afternoon, doing stopping and doing minka, and ending your day with ma'ariv or the bedtime shemad. That would also be a great way to put some order into your day. In 1 Corinthians 14, Rav Shaul is trying to teach and instruct a rather young new startup congregation in Corinth. And in the midst of many instructions that he gives them, he says this: "For God is not characterized by disorder, but by peace." Now, I don't know about you, but when things are just in their place, when things are in order, I do. I just feel more peaceful. What about you? You know, if we think about God as a God of order, we don't have to think very long of some really big examples. Right off the bat, in Bereshit, we have the order of creation. We go a little bit farther and we have the Mishkan, the tabernacle. Everything had to be done in order, made to a certain order. When it was taken down and put up, it was put up in a certain order. Everything about the Mishkan was about order. When the tribes camped around the Mishkan, they were given an order of the way they should camp. So there's a lot of, and that's just three, and there's many that we could look at if we had unlimited time that were, it's just obvious that God is a God of order. Rabbi Dessler from the famous Mussar yeshiva located in Kem in Lithuania often taught on the importance of the midah of order. And he would say that external disorder was taken to be a reflection of internal disarray. And that spiritual living requires order just as much as our material lives do. You know, every time we study Mussar and we study order, which we've done many times, someone will say to me, mention something about cleaning out a closet. And certainly that's an aspect of, you know, getting your environment in order, but it's also an internal order. So what is order exactly? What is the midah of order? Our spiritual practices book that we're studying says this: order is the sole trait that gives structure to our lives. The Hebrew word for order is one probably we all already know, and that's the word Seder. And where we know that word most from, of course, is the Pesach Seder, because the the Pesach meal, is a meal done in a specific order to teach a very important story, the story of redemption. So obviously too little order. And what do you have? You have chaos. And this is apparently what Rav Shaul was dealing with this congregation in Corinth. You know, if you spend more of your time looking for an item than actually using the item, your midah of order may be out of balance. It may be too little order. But on the other hand, if you, like my friend was one time, your midah of order might be out of balance on the other hand. We were sitting at a restaurant, and I was feeling a little bit ornery, knowing how she was. And the table had a little box with packets of sweetener. Some of them were sugar or sweet and low or something else. So there was 3 different colors, pink and green and white. And I wouldn't say anything, and I would just pick that box up and just mix up all the colors. And she couldn't stand it until she would grab the box and put all the colors back in a rigid order. But that is a midah of order that's out of balance the other way. Obsessiveness limits freedom. And, as we're compelled to have things in a certain order, in a certain place, very rigid. I know a person that has to check everything in the house like 40 times before he can leave the house. It can even become a disease, an obsessive compulsive disorder. And, this kind of a person with an overabundance of order can be very stressful to live with, especially if you are one that tends to lean towards the other way. Our book reminds us that really most things are outside of our control. We have very few things that we can control. But if we align ourselves with the order of the Creator, our lives will be more peaceful and run more smoothly. Our book also suggests that midah of order in balance comes from having good routines. The routines create a structure so that we can do these day-to-day tasks without having to think about them. And I heartily agree with him. I especially like routines in the more mundane things, like, putting the keys on a certain place makes it so much easier the next time I get ready to go somewhere and the keys are hanging right there. Or if I will, keep up my routine of emptying the dishwasher at night, it makes the next day so much easier when I get up, and I can start loading the dishwasher right away. Rabbi Dessler gives us 3 reasons why practicing order is so important. When you know where things are, first of all, he says that it gives us an inner satisfaction. We already talked about how it gives us peace, and it gives us some confidence in what we're doing. When you know where things are and you're doing a sketch, you don't have to think about it. Life is less stressful, which allows you to go about these routine tasks with some confidence. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to worry, am I doing the right thing? It also helps us save time. We talked about if you spend more time looking for something than using an item, you might be out of balance. But our book also talked about the example of a manufacturing plant where there was a spot for every single tool. But that allowed them, when they needed a tool, they knew right where to get it. And it made them just saved a lot of time in the process of whatever they were manufacturing. And then the last one he says is that some things only function properly when all their parts are in order. If you think about, for the few that may still wear or even know what a watch is, if it's got lots of cogs and things inside that all have to work together for the watch to function properly. But this is true of many things. Your automobile, a computer program, many things, everything has to work in order for it to work correctly. And if any one little thing, one little cog gets broken or gets slightly out of time, it just doesn't function properly. So we mentioned earlier that Hashem had a specific order for the tribes that camped around the Mishkan. Why was that so important? Why was it so important that he had to give them the order? But can you imagine 600,000 slaves coming into freedom for the first time? And they're almost like children that have been on holiday, on recess. They're not under the watchful eye of the teachers, and they're just kind of run amok. So imagine all the time that it would take to figure out who's going to camp on this side and who's going to camp on that side. So he gave them a specific order, and there's a lot of studies about why they were in that particular order, but he gave them a specific order of where to camp. But within each spot, in their spot on the around the Mishkan, they could camp anywhere they wanted within that area. And when Balaam saw, when he looked out over this camp, it inspired him to say these words, which we say often in our prayers. How goodly, ma tovu, how goodly are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel. from Numbers 24. You know, when I close my eyes and I picture my ideal garden, it's kind of like that. It's a mixture of structure and less structure. Uh, and it's not rigid, but there are areas where, you know, uh, there's certain plants growing over here and certain plants growing over here, but, you know, it's not rigid. It's not, you know, with the measuring, you know, how you do your hedges. And, you know, maybe that's why my house is like that as well. If you come into my house, on the surface, it may look pretty in order. But with, you know, things might be in the right drawer, they might be in the right room. But within that drawer, maybe there's a little chaos going on. If you open my utensil drawer, yeah, all the utensils are the, you know, knives and all those things are in that drawer, but maybe not in a rigid order. So that's kind of my comfort area, is somewhere in between those two. You know, it's funny. I realized just before the lesson started today that I always have a to-do list. And maybe you do too. Maybe that helps you keep in order. But ironically, on my to-do list for this week is to clean out my closet. Okay. Anyway, our book discusses that the appropriate level of order depends on the situation. And interestingly, he gives the example, one that would be very relevant to many of us right now, of an organization that is a startup versus one that's mature and been around for a while. Now, a mature organization has processes, policies in place to make things run smoothly. And, you know, a startup organization is still trying to work through all of that. In fact, at Magen Yesheni right now, every week the board of directors is meeting and going through trying to create and hash out bylaws. We're getting very close to being finished, maybe one more week, but we're having to, you know, go through. And so in our case, in the case of a startup organization, people might accept a little more chaos, where they would not in a mature organization. They would expect things to run smoothly. So the level of order often depends on the situation. Now, our author went on to describe this mature organization that he knew about and how they decided to make some major changes, and how he said often that doesn't work well. And he mentioned his a past rabbi of his own, Rabbi Alan Lew, who called the evil inclination the tumultuous whirlwind of impulses and dysfunctions that prevent us from doing what we should be doing. And in this organization that he described, when they tried to make major changes, they had a major malfunction, and it was quite a disaster. It was just that lure of let's do something new and try to get things done better. Rabbi Lew went on to provide a solution. He said we need to strengthen our good inclination through spiritual work, meditation, acts of loving kindness, such that over time we become better able to resist the seductive and seditious voice of the evil inclination. So a bit of disorder he attributes to the evil inclination, or too much disorder. So his phrase for the week sounds like a quote from one of my favorite books from ancient days. And that book was The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Maybe you're familiar with it. It was written by Stephen Covey. But the quote that he gives, which I think is a great one, actually comes from Pirkei Avot. It's first things first and last things last. And I always thought Stephen Covey was the genius that came up with that. That was already around a long time ago. You know, I keep a jar on my desk. It's right here. And in the jar, it's labeled first things first. And, you know, if you take a big jar and you fill it with sand, then you fill it with water, then you try to put in a lot of rocks, you're not going to get very many rocks in your jar. But if you reverse that, put your big rocks in first, then fill around there with sand, then pour water into it, you can get a lot more into your jar. And the rocks symbolize the important things, the most important things of the day, your priorities. And if you put them in first in your day, you will get more done. The next thing he suggests for the week, if this is your midah, if order is your midah for the week, observe your reactions throughout the day, your actions, and look for times when order is affecting your day, either because you've got too much order or too little order. Perhaps you're having trouble focusing during your prayer time. Look around you. Maybe your room where you pray is just chaotic and a mess. You know, inner and outer worlds are very connected. And like he said, external disorder reflects internal disarray. He also said to look for other, perhaps interconnected. We've talked about how midah are interconnected often. And if one trait over here gets out of balance, it can affect another one over here. So perhaps there's another midah that's out of balance if you're having trouble with your order. For example, he says humility. Perhaps your humility is out of balance. You know, how many of us would like to sit down after dinner, perhaps read a book, watch a television show in a nice, clean living room, but none of us want to take the responsibility for cleaning the living room? Or perhaps you're the other way, and as soon as someone sits down a glass, like my son-in-law, who I dearly love, but he follows people around. If you set your cup down, even if you're not finished with it, he's taking it to the kitchen to wash it. So just watch your actions throughout the day and see how you react with the midah of order. And then, of course, use all these observations to record in your journal. Now, the act of journaling is an extension of the midah of order itself. If your journal has been empty lately, perhaps your midah of order is out of balance. We've turned a new calendar. Perhaps you've bought a new journal book. It'd be a good time to get back on the practice of journaling. And besides, when you journal, it can oftentimes, if you go back and read, maybe you'll find routines that could be improved a little bit to make your life, your day go smoother. Maybe there's a daily routine that could be adjusted just a little bit. Or maybe it really is time to clean out that closet, like me. I've got to get to it this week. So if this is your midah for the week, he gives us some things to consider. Ask yourself where you are on this continuum. Would you say you're way over on the chaos side? Or are you completely on the other end where you're just rigid and obsessive? And if you're on the more rigid side, look for a way that you could bring that more in balance. Perhaps think of something that you could just let go. Perhaps someone sends you a really friendly text with a lot of grammatical errors in it, but you don't mention it. You just let it go. Or perhaps you finally finished all the dishes for the evening and someone puts a dirty glass in the sink. Maybe you could just let it go. Or if you're more on the other end, look for one area, one small change you could make in your day-to-day routine that would just bring more order to your day. Perhaps it would be emptying the dishwasher before bedtime. And that way, the next day, you could just begin to load all the dirty dishes right from the beginning of the day. Something small. He also suggests perhaps considering a to-do list. Now, I know I couldn't make it through my week without my to-do list. Immediately in the morning, I look at it. What do I need to do today? What I need to accomplish? And I love checking off when I do something on the to-do list. He also suggests, and I like to do this as well, either weekly or even every night or perhaps first thing in the morning with your coffee, just sit down and for a few minutes plan the week. Think about what you want to accomplish for the week. Plan the next day. Plan that day. And, put some rocks in. What are your rocks that you really want to accomplish that day? Okay, that's our midah of order. So now it's time to turn and go to our other book, the Mussar Torah commentary. And this week, we get to start a brand new Sefer of Torah. Shemot, we're in Shemot 1:1 through 6:1 this week. It's a very exciting time in our Torah reading, and I love it. It begins the story of Moshe and the people of Israel and the coming Exodus. And as I read the parsha this week, two things immediately came to my mind. The first one was what a genius Cecil B. DeMille is at taking a few scriptures from Torah and making a great 4-hour movie. The other one is that when we come to this time in the Torah study, I know that it's time to start preparing for the actual event, for Pesach. It's time to start getting our houses in order and start preparing for that soon and coming, because they often line up. The story of Pesach will come before the actual event this year. And so it's, these are the two things immediately come to my mind. And even in just this first parsha, so much happens. We see Moshe is born. He's put in a basket. He's rescued by the daughter of Pharaoh. Then he grows up. He gets into trouble. He has to leave Egypt, goes to Midian, where he encounters Hashem through the burning bush. Hashem sends him back to Egypt to begin the coming redemption. And that's just the peaks. There's a lot more that happens. I just hit the very highlights. But what we're going to focus on today is none of that. We're going to focus on a lesser known or lesser studied, perhaps, story in our parsha this week. And that is on the story of Shifra and Puah. Now, Shifra and Puah were the two midwives that exhibited our midah that we're going to study today, and that is Ometz Lev. Ometz Lev literally means a strong heart, or in English we might say moral courage. Now, from an article that I was reading by Rabbi Margolis, it said, even those who consider themselves fearful or anxious can access this quality of Ometz Lev in any given moment. And then he was reading from an excerpt from an article by Nachman, who said, courage is not about denying or repressing fear. Rather, the fundamental principle of courage is choosing not to frighten ourselves beyond the fear we already experience. Fear is unavoidable, perhaps even required. Courage involves moving forward despite our fear and not exasperating our anxieties. So moving forward in the face of fear is our midah of Ometz Lev. Basically, Ometz Lev is doing that which is right and just, even in the face of challenging emotions, fear, anxiousness. This article that I was reading goes on to say that this strength can, as most can, be directed positively or negatively. We must connect this Ometz Lev midah with chesed. According to a midrash, there's no real courage in using one's strength to push someone into a pit or off a roof. That does not show true strength. True courage, it says, consists of seizing the hand of one about to fall or lifting someone who has fallen. So it's not necessarily in the physical strength. In fact, we see an example of this in Deuteronomy 15:17, when it again uses the word ometz for strength to talk about those who clench their hearts so that they don't have to give to the poor. So it can be used, a strong heart can be used for good or bad. And I just had a thought, this wasn't even in my notes, and it's in a later parsha, but at some point it talks about how Pharaoh's heart is strengthened. And of course we know it was not used for good. Cultivating Ometz Lev means applying our energy to protect and stand up for others who are at risk, or even for ourselves when needed. But we must practice Ometz lev most when we leave our comfort zone and we take an unpopular stand, or we expose our own vulnerabilities, or we speak the truth, we confront others, we risk embarrassment, perhaps personal loss, or intervene on behalf of those who are unable to do so for themselves. That's how we strengthen Ometz lev. And I think that as we study Shifra and Pua, we will see that they exhibited all of these. So as Shemot begins, we have a new king. It says he doesn't know anything about Joseph. He's forgotten all about Joseph. And he perceives this fruitful group of Israelites to be a threat, a potential threat at least. The Egyptian taskmasters are becoming hard, and they're forcing the slaves to produce more and more labor. Yet the Israelites are still flourishing. They're still fertile. So Pharaoh orders the midwives this way. When you deliver the Hebrew women, look at the birth stool. If it is a boy, kill him. If it is a girl, let her live. From Exodus 1:15 and 16. But the next verse right after that goes like this. The midwives, fearing God, did not do as the king of Egypt had told them. They let the baby boys live. So the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and said to them, "Why have you done this, letting the boys live?" And the midwives said to Pharaoh, "Because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. They are vigorous. Before the midwife can come to them, they have already given birth." And it says, and God dwelt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and increased greatly. And God established households for the midwives because they feared God. Maybe this is the first recorded act of civil disobedience. Now then, have you always assumed, like I did, just assumed, that these midwives were Hebrews? I had always thought that, but I found a unique commentary, and one that our Mussar Torah commentary mentions, that says perhaps otherwise. Perhaps what if they weren't Hebrew, but they were Egyptians? Some commentaries trying to read the Hebrew better than we do suggest that it could be read that these were Egyptian midwives sent to help the Hebrew women. Perhaps they were Pharaoh's own subjects, and he expected them to obey his commandment, much more so perhaps than he would if he commanded Hebrew midwives. And according to this commentary, these Egyptian women, if they were indeed Egyptian, reached across national and religious divides, feeling human and moral solidarity with their sisters, and in a bond stronger than their allegiance to their king. Another interesting facet of this story is how the midwives answer Pharaoh when summoned before him. They answer in a way in the Hebrew that basically says that the Israelite women are like animals when giving birth, and they use the word hayot. Now, most commentaries will say that this can either mean vigorous or it can mean animal-like. And in answering this way, they're in a way mocking Pharaoh's view of the Israelites. And he just sees them as not even humans. They're like animals. They're a subhuman creature. And you know, throughout time, when one people has undertaken to oppress and hate another group of people, the first thing that they must set out to do is to remove that group's humanity. And this was done, we know, towards the Jews during the Holocaust. Although the text says that God rewarded the midwives for their actions, for their courageous actions, think about, we know the end of the story, but they did not. They had no way of knowing in that moment what would happen when Pharaoh found out, as surely he would. In fact, they probably realized that they were facing great danger, even execution, when he learned of their very courageous actions. Much like the men going into the fiery furnace did not know that they were going to come out of that fiery furnace, but they made the courageous decision that they would not bow down, even faced with the fiery furnace. So we can see many ways in which Shifra and Pua served as good examples of Ometz Lev. As we saw in that article that I was reading from, this trait can be quite complex and sometimes even dangerous, which can cause us to easily drift into conceit, obstinacy, the very opposite of the much praised quality of humility. In Pirkei Avot, Yehuda ben Tema says, and we've studied this before in a previous book study, be strong like the leopard, light like the eagle, swift like the deer, and mighty like the lion. But then he adds a phrase, to do the will of God who is in heaven. That's from Pirkei Avot 5:20. And, as human beings, we are urged to reach for these qualities, but only in the service of Hashem. Only then will we be acting for the greater good and not for our own selfish desires. Yehuda ben Tema continues, the brazen-faced are bound for Gehenna, and the shamefaced are bound for the Garden of Eden. So in our own lives, how do we know? How do we know whether we're acting with a strong heart for God's will or for our own? Are we being motivated by fame, admiration, personal gratification of some kind? Is the strength welling up in us righteous anger for the sake of heaven? Or is it coming from the powerful force of our own ego? Psalm 27:14 may help us out with this a little bit. It says, wait on the Lord, be of good courage, and he shall strengthen your heart. Wait, I say, on the Lord. Now, Psalm 27 describes a number of events that were tragic or dangerous that the psalmist had experienced or was experiencing, but he encourages the reader to wait on Hashem, hope in Hashem. The strength here is not talking about physical strength, and certainly not the willfulness of the egotist. Rather, this courage comes from a trusting relationship with Hashem. Pirkei Avot says, who is heroic? Who is a hero? And they answer, one who conquers one's own impulse. As it is said, better to be forbearing than mighty, to have self-control than to conquer a city. And we know from working through Mussar, it takes much more strength to control our what we want to do, our evil inclination, than it can be to lift weights in the gym. This kind of turns our understanding of strength inside out. We see a hero as someone who runs into a burning building to rescue a child or rushes onto the battlefield to save a wounded comrade, but the Mishnah chooses instead to praise inner strength, the capacity to work skillfully with the complex energies that move in our hearts. So overcoming our selfish desires, that's what takes real Ometz Lev. And they say it's easier to summon physical strength than to respond with courage when what threatens us is the status quo, is the assumption of those around us, or at the risk of speaking up in an unpopular position, or when you would rather just be silent. Of course, we know the way of Mussar is the middle way, a midah that is balanced. For Ometz Lev, the key to such a balance lies in the term itself. Ometz means strong. And it's a quality of strength to be able to speak the truth when needed and defy perhaps community expectations and go against the flow. But it must be tempered by the second half of the phrase, which is lev, or heart. So it has to be combined strength with love and gentleness and the desire for the well-being of others. Ometz lev can be unbalanced, like we said, in either direction. Timidity in the face of a moral challenge means that we miss opportunities to partner with Hashem in tikkun olam, in repairing and bringing good to the world. Allowing the disapproval of others, fear of embarrassment, fear of getting it wrong to prevent us from doing the work of justice, enables those who do injustice to continue. Lacking trust in ourselves, we fail to imagine how anything we could do could make a difference. On the other hand, I know we have all felt, especially in recent days, that adrenaline surge, that rush of angry energy. You have to do something. Something needs to be done. Driven by impulsive boldness, unsoftened by the heart. It's ometz without the lev. And we run the risk of crusading for our own glory. And there's a lot of that going on right now. We see so much seeming injustice in the world. Man, we want to jump on every battle. Such strength is propelled by our own needs rather than our devotion to serve Hashem. Our book ends this study this week of Ometz lev with this: discerning the path of Ometz lev, courage born of love and devotion, is a delicate dance for us all. And I would add, especially in the days that we are in at this very moment. So the book always gives us some great questions to ponder as we, and gives us great, perhaps, information to journal, helps us what we can journal with this week. What difference would it have made if the midwives were Hebrew or if they were not? Good questions to ponder. In our own lives, how can we distinguish between a rush of energy that is sacred and one that derives from our own ego? When we are overwhelmed by the challenges in the world around us, what is the best way to choose? How do we choose to respond? Like the midwives, they came up with such a great response, but how do we choose a response? Our book gives us some practices for the week. If your midah for the week is going to be Ometz lev, it says the next time you are asked to engage in a political action and you want to jump on it right away, take a moment to consider, does this urge come from my own ego or the call of the sacred? The next time, perhaps you feel disheartened by the state of the world and doubt that you can do anything meaningful, ask yourself, what would Shifra and Pua do right now? What would be the Ometz lev thing to do right now? Well, that is our lesson for this week. We began in spiritual practices looking at Seder, at order, and we learned that external disorder can reflect an internal disarray. Spiritual living requires order, just as our material lives require order, because we serve Hashem, who is a God of order. Then we moved on to the Mussar Torah commentary as we looked at Ometz lev, a strong heart. And we studied Shifra and Pua, who certainly were great examples of that, as they saved the Hebrew baby boys from death in defiance of the Pharaoh, perhaps the first recorded incident of civil disobedience. But we also learned that this trait can be used for our own ego, our own purposes, or it can be used in the service of Hashem. And so we have to pause, maybe wait on Hashem to strengthen our heart so that we know if we're using this for his service or for our own. Well, thank you for joining all of us this week as we work to strengthen our midah. Uh, Share this video with a friend, maybe someone you want to study with. Have a great week as we begin to study this new book of Torah. It's a very exciting book, Shemot. But most importantly, come back next week as we continue on. I think I was looking ahead. We have about 5 lessons left in our spiritual practices book, and we'll see if we want to take a break or what we want to do at that time. But at least come back for the next 5 weeks and let's finish our study strong. I hope you have a great week. If you're here in Texas, get out and enjoy some of this beautiful weather before it turns bad again, as it surely will. And keep our country in prayer as whatever happens this week, Hashem is in control. Thank you for joining me, and I will see you next Tuesday.